go. Right down the chute, Kevin Durant.
NBA Lockdown with Bruce Bowen.
Gets it to James. Here's a three for the win. Oh, it is good.
The NBA Lockdown podcast with Bruce Bowen. Along with three-time NBA champion Bruce Bowen, here's ESPN.com NBA columnist Israel Gutierrez.
Welcome into another edition of the NBA Lockdown podcast. We're coming down the stretch run here, Bruce, because it's a finals rematch between the Heat and the Spurs. We'll start off, obviously, discussing that.
We're happy to be back here this year. We're happy to have another opportunity at it. We're happy for that it's the Heat again. We'll be ready for them. We've got some experience, obviously, from last year against them, and we'll go back and look at some film, and we've got that bad taste in our mouth still. So hopefully we'll be ready to take it this time.
All right, Bruce, let me start with you here, because that was the closest thing to a guarantee you'll ever hear out of Tim Duncan's mouth, basically saying he wants to get it this time and they will get it this time. What's different about this year's San Antonio Spurs that's going to allow them to be better than last year and to get past Miami? What's different about this year's team?
It's not a different offense. It's not a different system, but it is more about the guys. Basically, everyone that is here now was there last year and experienced that heartbreaking Game 6 loss, except Marco Bellinelli. So you take that into account. You have this group. They've been together longer now. And I think a lot of it has to do, Izzy, with the confidence that taste that they do have as far as you were a few seconds away from winning it all. It wasn't as if they got stomped by the Heat and they come back the next year. But you know, it was surprising to me to hear Tim say the things that he said. But as a leader of that ball club, he has to have everyone thinking on that same page. But it's not necessarily anything different, Izzy. It's more about the fact that they have been there and they've competed. They competed to a certain level where, you know, they were right there and they just didn't close the deal. So it's far and few between as far as the areas of error in the game concerning a team like the Miami Heat last season, but take into account is that Miami is different this year as well.
Right. And, you know, sticking with the Spurs, though, for a second, you saw how badly they wanted it in that Game 6 against Oklahoma City. First of all, they hadn't won there in, 10 games under Pop, or the longest losing streak of any one site under Greg Popovich for the Spurs. And they did it in the second half without Tony Parker. You saw Tim Duncan. You saw that sort of emotion out of him, sort of tugging on his jersey after the game. Did you notice a team that was, that was basically that hungry, that really didn't want to go back to a Game 7? They wanted this rematch, and they wanted it to start. Well, not that it was started any earlier, but they wanted to get there as soon as possible.
Absolutely. You know, before that game, I believe I was in Bristol and on SportsCenter, and I talked about the experience, and I felt like the Spurs were going to win that game because now it was no longer about making another adjustment. You know, it was we've seen your adjustments, you've seen ours. Now it's about, you know, the experience, and I just felt like the experience of the San Antonio Spurs was going to win out over Russell Westbrook, you know, Serge Ibaka, and Kevin Durant. When it comes down to it, I just felt like they had more players with those in-game moments that it's not new to them. I mean, going to Tim late in that overtime, you know, to get a bucket, that wasn't new to San Antonio. Manu taking the last shot or taking the big shots for the San Antonio Spurs, that wasn't new. So, you know, it's more about they've had success doing things like that in the past. And you can rely on those things, and that's where, you know, I talk about, you know, the experience of players of being in certain moments. Manu, Tim, and Tony have seen so many different situations when it comes to the game of basketball, as far as teams trying to take certain strengths away from them, that they're able to continuously be, I think, available, number one, but more important, they make the right decisions in those moments that they have when they're dealing with those late game moments.
You know, what was new was the idea of Derek Fisher defending Tim Duncan. Like, that was probably not the matchup that Scotty Brooks wanted in that situation. But hey, stuff happens sometimes when you're mixing.
Izzy,
you're cross-matched.
Izzy, just on that though, and seeing this is where you get discombobulated and you don't stick to the game plan. there was a breakdown defensively for Oklahoma City Thunder. And this is where we talk about how your mental toughness and your mental fortitude needs to be at an A-plus level, especially late in the games, where you cannot have Derek Fisher on Tim Duncan and he's in the paint. We didn't say he was at the top of the key, but he's in the paint. How do you have a breakdown like that? And so the Spurs, in their wisdom, they take advantage of those moments.
All right, well, continuing with this finals preview discussion, we saw what the Spurs did to LeBron James and Dwayne Wade last year in the finals. They basically did everything possible to contain, to protect the paint and played off of him. Even with a guy like Kawhi Leonard, decided to play off of LeBron as much as possible, encourage him to take those jump shots. Now, you would think that LeBron in the regular season anticipated that happening, would have a good couple of games maybe against them, but in the regular season, he only averaged 18.5 points against San Antonio and shot 42% from the field. Second lowest field goal percentage and scoring average against any opponent this season. The only other one was the Bulls, who, they play him in a different way entirely. They play him more of a physical style.
Right.
How do you see that working again if that's where the Spurs go to? Do you think that Pop maybe mixes it up a little bit, or trusts that, hey, last time we were a bucket away from getting there, this time we're going with the same strategy?
Yeah, no, you have to change. You can't go with the same strategy because the team is completely different. LeBron is playing at another level. And, again, I don't think it'll be too much of a surprise for LeBron James, being that this is his fifth finals, one in Cleveland, and then, now going into the fourth one with the Miami Heat. So when you have a player of his caliber that has seen so many different scenarios when it comes to teams trying to guard him differently, I think he's going to just play more. He's going to watch film from that last season and see how the Spurs were able to do things. But I think it's not even about that for the Spurs, is it? I think it's more about, how can you try and kind of contain LeBron and Dwayne Wade, especially with the way Dwayne Wade is playing right now. It's so different than last year. So many people are going to say, well, hey, the Spurs were only one game away last year, or I should say a few seconds away, and it's going to be completely different this year. But, it's a different team from both angles, both sides. And so as you go into preparation from the Spurs perspective, you have to, really focus on some of the other key components other than just LeBron and Dwayne or Chris Bosh. You have to look at, say, Norris Cole and the way he's able to change the game and keep things going in a certain way where, his energy affects the game. And that's what you want from one of your role players. Ray Allen is still able to shoot the ball. I mean, they understand that, and it's not a big to-do. And so you have Ray Allen. You have Rashard Lewis, who's playing, unbelievable basketball right now, but it's from the standpoint of, these are very similar teams, and you look at how, San Antonio seems to always kind of find pieces that fit their system, and that's what you're seeing from the Miami Heat as well. You're seeing guys step in and play that now you can't just focus on LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. You have to focus on everyone, and I think, one of the game changers, you're going to see a difference in so many of the players from Miami's perspective because, it's so much opportunity for them to do different things now.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that Heat offense, and it's been fantastic, frankly. Their effective field goal percentage of 56.1% is the highest all time in a postseason. So the Spurs are going to have to worry a lot about the Heat's offense too. But before I get there, I want to keep talking about the Spurs and Tony Parker and his potential influence in this series with a sprained or a sore left ankle. But here's what Greg Popovich said after the game about Tony's availability for Thursday's Game 1.
I have no idea. I don't know what the deal is. He came to me about 8 minutes on the clock and said he couldn't go. He couldn't cut. He was limping on it. He couldn't cut sideways or forward, really. He sprained it in Game 4, and he aggravated it in Game 5, and we didn't make a big deal out of it, but I guess it caught up with him.
Okay, Bruce, here's where we need that insider Spurs information, okay? I know you were on Tony's doorstep when he got home from the game on Thursday night, asking him what his ankle feels like. What do you think the issue is here? How much do you think he's going to do you think he's going to be available, and how much do you think he's going to be able to give given his condition? Inside information, Bruce. Give me the good stuff.
C'est pas possible. C'est pas possible.
I don't know what that means.
And that's part of the reason why I said that, Izzy. No, in all seriousness, I think it's more about all the games that Tony has played is really catching up to him. This has been an injury-plagued season for him as compared to what we've seen. So you take 2 European championships, you take going to the finals last year, you take the year before then going long into the playoffs. So I think it's more about things kind of catching up, and that's what happens when you play a lot. And so do I think he's going to play? Absolutely, because this is the finals, and the Spurs without Tony, they don't have a chance to beat the Miami Heat. Izzy, I say beat them in a 7-game series, or I should say it. Yeah, I don't think they have a chance to beat them in 4 games without Tony Parker. Tony is such a big piece of what they do, and this is where you might have a player surprise a team because he either shot lights out or they didn't prepare for him necessarily, but you don't have anybody on the bench that's capable of doing what he did, and if you did, that person would have been playing a lot more. So I do believe Tony will play, but I think it's so much about rest for Tony right now. And if we go back a little bit, the fact that Pop chose to go ahead, okay, I'm gonna sit Tony out because he's thinking of possible Game 7 in San Antonio. He doesn't want to run his star point guard down at this particular moment just because he's trying to get a victory in OKC. If it's necessary, we'll go to 7. That was his form of thinking. But also, Izzy, it's just funny how certain things surprise teams, and I don't think that with the surprise of what took place at OKC, they were very aware of, hey, Tony's not there. We should be able to do something. But I think that's also part of the will of the San Antonio Spurs as far as being able to still play through things even without one of your key members.
Right. We remembered what last year's looked like. It was so much fun to watch. It was good basketball on both sides. Mm-hmm. I mentioned that offensive stat for Miami. Well, the defensive stat kind of tells you that they haven't been that dominant because their opponents in the postseason are allowing an effective shooting percentage of 51.9%. And since the three-point line was adopted, no team has allowed an effective field goal percentage above 50 and gone on to win the title that season. However, Miami's basically been doing it with such an effective offense that it sort of doesn't really make for the defensive end that big of a concern. But what that tells me is that, especially with the Spurs offense and the way that how sort of fluid they are and how their chemistry is, that this will be sort of an offensive series. Like you're going to see a couple of games where both teams, or probably several games where both teams score in triple figures. But now going over to the Heat side, because we talked about Tim Duncan and that whole Spurs team's motivation, but LeBron's got his own. Miami Heat's got their own motivation, and it mostly starts with LeBron in that he understands legacy. He recognizes that if he loses again, he's going to have a losing record in the finals, and that's going to look bad. He wants this three-peat because MJ had a three-peat, Kobe had a three-peat. This is really important to him. It kind of, when you mentioned it, it kind of struck me. I didn't even think of it in this way, but he's been to the finals 5 times now, and this will be the 3rd time in 5 tries he's faced the Spurs. So this is kind of his mountain to climb here, his nemesis. And you remember back the first time they met. Of course, you remember. You were there. But when Tim told him afterward, said, "This is going to be your league. Thanks for letting me have this one right now." Well, now he's trying to get another one from LeBron, and I don't think LeBron wants to relinquish it. Where do you see – because you've seen the way how emotional he was against the Pacers. That had a lot to do with the opponent. But where do you see sort of his level of motivation helping him in this series? Because and I know this isn't, strategy or, analysis of any sort really, but LeBron really, really, really wants this.
And you're absolutely right. It's part of everything I tell people. I say I ask him the same questions that I asked him his very first time that he stepped onto the NBA floor against me. And when I said, "Hey, make sure you continue to have fun. Are you having fun?" He's like, "Absolutely." I said, "Where do you want to be, when it's all said and done?" And he continues to say, "I want to be the best, Bruce. That's my goal. I want to be the best player to play the game." And he has not strayed away from that, Izzy. He has not settled. And that's what happens sometimes when you have a little success. It's very few players that have the fortitude to continue to press forward, especially when you've received so many accolades. And I say accolades, I'm talking MVPs, gold medals for representing your country. This is a scenario where it's almost right for him to go up against, a very good coach in Greg Popovich, someone that is one of the best at coming up with strategies and making adjustments to try to limit the effectiveness of a star player. And so he's up for that challenge. I love the way he handled himself as far as the whole Lance Stevenson situation and his ability to focus in the moment. Is by far on par to Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and those types of individuals. But he's worked so hard for this, and it's only right that he has the opportunity as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Let me ask you this in terms of what Miami sort of does here, or what you think the Spurs will do. Because we saw the Spurs go to a stretch 4 in Matt Bonner for the last couple games in that series, really to keep Ibaka out of the paint. And this one, though, I'm going to just assume that Spoelstra's sticking with Rashard Lewis in the starting lineup at this point, because his last 2 games, he's been really good. 9 threes in the last 2 games of that Indiana Pacers series, even though they lost that first game in Indiana, or that 5th game in Indiana. You would assume he's going to stay in there because he's got decent size at 6'9". He can defend a 4 and, for spots can keep a body on 5-man. So with him being a threat out on the perimeter, if you're Greg Popovich, do you go back to Splitter and Duncan and then make the adjustments after that? Or do you start off sort of matching up with Miami, and it's not even just matching up because you also, as a Spurs team, were successful with a stretch 4 in that lineup? Where do you think Pop goes, assuming Spoelstra sticks with the Rashard Lewis starting lineup?
Yeah, I think you go back to Splitter for the simple fact that that's what you had been doing for the most part, and then you ran into a roadblock in OKC, and you made the necessary adjustment to try to keep, you still want to keep folks guessing, and so that's what I think will take place. You'll say on Rashard's ability to step in and kind of give you something, like Mike Miller did, last year, or even Shane Battier in the final game. I think that needs to be talked about from the standpoint that he's doing it defensively, Izzy. He really had a huge effect on David West, and I've never known Rashard to be a defender, but he did a fantastic job. It's like, for me, thinking about what they're going to do is how the Spurs play. I mean, if you do choose to play him, he can match up maybe against Tim, and who I think Splitter possibly can match up against Chris Bosh. But it's going to be interesting because you have 2 very good teams. And I know we've said this, and you said it earlier, Izzy, about the fact that it's going to be a high-scoring affair. And it's just both teams, they do things in a variety of ways that really forces the opponent to really have to make the adjustments, because you don't want to go in making adjustments in game 1. You want to see what's going on, and possibly, even if the San Antonio Spurs were to start, say Thiago Splitter and they struggle, I don't think you necessarily see an immediate change right then and there. They'll try to see if they can affect the game different ways and then possibly make a change. But the key is the ball movement on offense. If Miami starts going one-on-one and that's all that they're doing, and they're not getting the ball from one side of the floor to the other, then it can prove to be I don't think that's as advantageous for them as compared to, attack, kick, movement, bodies moving. When you get that type of activity, it's great basketball to see. And we saw it against Indiana, especially the closeout game. I mean, the ball was moving, guys were moving, and of course LeBron was on a mission. I don't think that they will go away from that, especially with LeBron being on a mission, because it has allowed them to get the victories. And if they can play that way, it spells trouble. It spells trouble for their opponent.
Yeah, I think if the Spurs start Splitter, it kind of is exactly what Spoelstra wants. I think he'll put Rashard on Splitter anyway and keep Bosh on Tim Duncan to keep a more traditional power forward matchup on Duncan, and then if they want to go to splitter and throw off their offense, which, go to that mismatch, I think Miami will take its chances with not only Richard on him, but, with the help and sort of making the game a little frantic for him and see if he can handle it. He'll handle it better than Roy Hibbert, because he's a better passer and probably, just a sharper offensive team altogether. But I think that's what Spoelstra would want. Obviously, it would only really benefit Miami is if, like you said, that offense is flowing and they're moving the ball and they're sucking in splitter into the lane and everything else and kicking out to Richard. That's where it'll benefit Miami the most. But I'm going to have to put you under pressure here, Bruce, because I was going to give you till Wednesday to make a prediction, but mine is already going to be online. So I got Heat in 6. Pressure's on. Give me a pick.
I'm going with the Spurs in 7, Izzy. The Spurs in 7. But no. I mean, you got to realize, man. I've said this before. This is tough for me from the standpoint that, it's such great basketball right now. I know that people want to say things like, oh, you're a homer. That's what you're going with. No, it has nothing to do with that. The homer aspect of things, I could care less. This is really two good teams that are going against each other, and we don't need to add to the drama. And what I mean by that is trying to create, something that we've never seen from these two teams. These are two of the best defensive teams. These are two of the best offensive teams. I'm going with the team that has the advantage, and that would be home court. If this game started in Miami, I would not be picking San Antonio. I would be picking Miami because I would feel like they have the advantage of coming back home to get a game as they did in Game 7. So this is I don't know if there has ever been such a even series in the past where we look at both teams and the style of play, the way that they've rested their players, and the way that they look at resting players. I don't know if I've seen it quite like this before, Izzy, and I'm looking forward to it getting going.
Well, I'll tell you, the quote-unquote experts on ESPN, that includes me, 12 of them picked the Spurs, 6 of them picked Miami, and I think let's say the most courageous pick would be Kevin Pelton, who picked the Spurs in 5, which is interesting. That just means they hold their home 3 and then take one in Miami. There you go. I think a lot of people would be surprised if that would happen, but we'll see. Obviously, it's going to be a great series. We'll talk more preview about it on Wednesday, but we're going to take a quick break here. Afterward, we're going to try to fix the Pacers and the Thunder after their losses in respective conference finals. We'll talk about that in a second.
Coming this summer, the 2014 FIFA World Cup from Brazil. Every goal.
The shot scores! The USA leads by 2!
Every save.
Here's Germany up. Steal. Closer. In the box. The shot is stopped.
Every match. Wherever you are this summer, take the FIFA World Cup with you. It's on ESPN Radio and the ESPN Radio app.
Lance, a lot's been made about, his future with the Pacers. Do you want to see number 1 by your side next season?
I don't know. That's for Larry, Kevin, for them to decide. It'd be great. We came in this league together. It'll be great for us to continue our journey together. He's played a huge year this whole season and in this postseason. So it's definitely put pressure on us to make decisions going forward with Lance.
All right, Bruce, this has been a pet peeve of mine, or an issue for me all weekend long, because I was right in front of Paul George, okay? And listen, Paul George heard the question clear as day. As a matter of fact, later in the press conference, he had a lady or a woman repeat her question because he wasn't exactly sure what it was she was asking. So therefore, exactly that Paul George knows what's being asked. He heard the question, do you want number 1 by your side next year? And it was... long pause. I don't know. And then he went on to say nice things about Lance. That's not an endorsement. And you know this as well as anybody. If you have a chance to say, hey, I want this guy back, he's my guy, you say it, and you say it with with authority,
Conviction.
and you just know that entirely it's out of your hands. So you just give your sort of endorsement right off the bat, and then you let the management deal with it. When you say from the beginning, I don't know, that means we don't really need him. And it's been consistent with everything else Paul George said about Lance Stevenson throughout those finals. He did not have his back around about any of that, the shenanigans with him and LeBron James and all that other stuff. He said he had to grow up, even though he's like not even a year older than Lance. So to you, did that sound like a player who wanted to be teammates with Lance Stevenson again next year?
Absolutely not. And trying to be diplomatic on the whole ordeal, you said it is, if you give ringing endorsements behind someone that you still want to play with, and that's something that I didn't get from him. He didn't say anything like, well, with Lance we get this type of play. With Lance we get this, we get that. He didn't say anything as far as the beneficial or the things that he adds to the club. He did talk about that they came in together. And, even though that's the case, if you want someone, you say it. Yes, next question. But that wasn't the case. And as he was continuing on, it is a tough spot right after a game, right after a loss, you're down, what have you. But in the end, they understand that Lance Stevenson is not a player that I think is necessarily welcomed as a teammate, especially after this particular season that took place.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with him saying that. If he's supposed to be the franchise guy, if you know they want to build around you, you can make it clear to the front office folks, to your coaches, listen, I don't think him and I can grow together. I don't think him and I can play well together because he sort of stunts my growth with, how many times during the series, I remember it 3 or 4 times where Paul just mentioned, I just want to play basketball. That had to do with, the officiating, but it also had to do with Lance and his antics. That's something that it's just not his style. It doesn't vibe well with him, and I think he made it perfectly clear throughout that series that was the case. So his message was heard, and I don't want to hear anybody talking about, oh, you tweeted that out of context, because I only tweeted the beginning part where he said, I don't know. Come on now. I was there. I saw it. I know the context. Paul knows what he meant. We're moving on. So what do you think? There's this sort of debate here on what do you do with the Pacers. Do you try to change things? Do you try to maybe move Roy Hibbert? Do you not re-sign Lance Stevenson, look for another option there as a wing player to team next to Paul George? Part of the problem with that, however, is, Bruce, it's a weak Eastern Conference, really. You've got a couple of up-and-coming teams, and maybe the Washington Wizards. You could argue that the Cleveland Cavaliers are on their way up with another potential number 1 draft pick, or at least pieces with which to make trades. Do you settle for being the second-best team in a conference and just do your best to get past Miami again, assuming they might have some changes? Or do you just say, you know what, we're not going to settle and cross our fingers and roll dice. We're going to actually make a move and try to fix what was the problem last year? Which way would you lean toward going? Because these guys are still young, too. You could just make that argument that they'll just naturally be better next year.
Yeah, no, I think you keep Roy Hibbert. I think that you can work with that type of length and that type of intelligence on the floor. It's just, I think you can do without Lance Stevenson. You can develop one of your younger players, somebody else, or put even more of a responsibility on, Paul George as far as his creating ability, because I thought sometimes the ball stopped with.
Well, they need a point guard, Bruce. They absolutely need a point guard who can create, right?
I agree. And so, you take that group, though. I think what would be important is that, Coach Vogel have a sit down with all those guys this week and said, fellas, look here, we're not going through this again next year. We let a great opportunity get away because of little things that ate away at our team, and we finished up our season the last 2 months the way we did. So I think when you do it quite like that, Izzy, now those players going into the off season, or I should say during their summer now, they know what's expected. They know what type of accountability that they're going to be held to, because they're starting it right now. It's not about, getting home court advantage or anything like that. We want to be the best we can be, period. And that's a process. It doesn't just happen in 3 months or 4 or 5. It's a process, but I think the more that they understand which direction they're going, as far as Coach Vogel letting them know that we're going to do things this way and that's that, I think you get more of a respect from the players, and then guys kind of know on exactly what to work on as far as it going into the summer.
I just the tough part about this team is that they don't really have much flexibility, because you don't think, like, let's just say they do bite the bullet and say, hey, we're going to try to move Roy Hibbert, and it's been reported that, quote unquote, Hibbert's camp wouldn't be opposed to a trade. But he makes, going through 2015-16, makes $15 million plus. David West, even though I don't think he'd be an option to be moved because he was such a stable force on this team, he's making $12 million plus through that same time frame. George Hill, I can't believe this. George Hill's making $8 million a year until 2017. And, outside of that, you still got Scola on the books for another year. He might be movable. He might be attractive for somebody, but how much are you going to get back for that? Certainly not what you gave up. And then, Paul George's max deal is going to kick in next year. And plus, Jan Mahimi's even making $4 million through 2016. So they're kind of strapped with contracts that you don't look very movable. And, their payroll next year is already at $65 million. So we don't know what they could possibly do differently. Maybe they go to Chris Copeland more as an outside threat and less of two guys that try to create in Paul and Lance Stevenson. Not sure what they could possibly do, but Larry Bird's going to be out there and active. Heck, he was out there and active this year with Andrew Bynum and Evan Turner, a couple of moves that didn't work out. But he's not going to settle for what this team did this year. Heck, it was a couple of years ago where they got blown out in Miami, where he gave them the soft quote, and I'm guessing this year is probably not going to be much different in his mind. But we should also mention that Frank Vogel is not the reason for their failures, at least according to Larry Bird, because he was retained and he's not going to lose his job. On the other side, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, and a lot of people, including myself, are very critical of Scotty Brooks. Don't think he's the guy to bring Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook over the top. I said this on the radio show yesterday. Michael Jordan didn't win until he got Phil Jackson. Okay, LeBron, for everything he was worth in Cleveland, didn't win until he teamed up with Spoelstra, and obviously had talent, but you can tell the system works really well for his liking. And Spoelstra and he communicate especially well. I don't think that Scotty Brooks is the guy for Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. Those two guys are too good to not have an offensive game plan. To me, and this is just me trying to read the guy's mind, but I think Russell Westbrook is begging for some better coaching, some better strategy. I don't think Russell Westbrook wants to be that guy who just pulls up every other possession in half court. I think he wants to be known as the best point guard in the league, and that comes with, you're helped out if you have a better offensive system in that scenario. You don't have to do everything on your own. So how much do you blame blame's probably a strong word. How much do you, but I have to use it, blame Scotty Brooks for this and their failure to get past the Spurs? And do you think he is still the answer as a head coach going forward with this team?
Izzy, I love Scotty Brooks. And I feel like he is a very good coach for this ball club. The way that they've grown, the way that Russell Westbrook has been able to become an elite point guard at that position, but in a different way. He's allowed those guys, he allows them to utilize their strengths, and their strengths enhance one another. I mean, you think about the fact that Russell Westbrook is attacking the basket. He creates opportunities for others through his attacking style. Now, you can look at film and kind of break things down. And I said this, I think, last season or LeBron's first year. There were some shots that he would take, Izzy. He didn't have to take those shots, but he took them because he could. And Spoelstra got with him, and they looked at the film session. They looked at the film and said, hey, if we take away those 5 bad shots right there, I think your percentage goes up. Then you start taking better shots, and you realize that, yes, you can take a shot whenever you want to, but look at what happens when you take a more efficient shot. They got to the finals with Scott Brooks as the head coach. Kevin Durant respects Scott as a head coach. It's more about, their bench play. Is they just don't have the pieces, they have not developed the pieces like with what Jeremy Lamb did early in the season without Russell Westbrook. I thought he had made the necessary turn as far as when we look at those players that's going into their third or fourth year and we start to see them become more productive. And it just didn't happen per se once Russell came back. I don't know what happened with Jeremy, but he just wasn't as productive. But Reggie Jackson continued to move forward, which is what's necessary for your ball club. I think having that, because their system is a lot like the Spurs. Sam Presti takes away a lot of the same things that San Antonio did, and he's trying to, garner that within their bench play. I think you have some good young pieces. I talked about Jeremy Lamb and Reggie Jackson. Those are very good young players. But you also got Steven Adams, and he's able to bring you something. So they're moving in the right direction, Izzy, as far as, what's to take place. It's just they got beat by a better team. And when you get beat by a better team, a future Hall of Fame coach, you take your hat off to that group and say, you know what, well, hey, we better opportunity for us next time.
You're making my case for me, Bruce. You started off by saying Scott Brooks allows them to, and you went from there. That's exactly what Scott Brooks does. He allows them to do whatever the heck they want. He gives them the ball, and he says, hey, there you go. Like there's very few coaches I would say that about, because it's frankly pretty insulting if you just say you roll the ball out. Obviously, they're not just rolling the ball out, but if you look at their offense, it's quite vanilla. And if you look at them in pressure situations, what do? They get the ball in Russell's hands, or they get the ball in Kevin's hands, and it's get out of my way. And it didn't work out, obviously, in this last game. In Game 6, you saw Kevin Durant turn the ball over there. But there's just not enough there. And you said they got beat by a better team. No, I think they got beat by a team that plays better. That's, because if you watch those two games in Oklahoma City, that Oklahoma City did win, games 3 and 4, when the Spurs offense was not, what we're used to, when they sort of deviated from what they normally do, you saw a talent disparity there. You said, wow, Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook are the two best players on the floor. And they were that entire series, but they were not able to take advantage of it enough. I think they've got plenty of pieces. I mean, Reggie Jackson's a solid third piece, or fourth piece if you call him that. Serge Ibaka, we saw his impact. He should be able to, to have more of a role in the offense maybe than just, in 17 games giving you 12 points. This guy could average 15 to 18 points if you vary things up. Way too many shots for just Durant and Russell Westbrook. So I just think, they had plenty of pieces there, and they had the potential to get to the finals again, and they didn't, and I think it's in large part because of Scott. But you know what? It could be a situation where he's still growing as a head coach. That's quite possible. But, there's a lot of times where you have to be hard and make a decision. You have to say, hey, this guy, you say it as players, does this guy hit his ceiling? Well, I think as a coach, Scotty Brooks has hit his ceiling, and I think they either he needs maybe some more help from assistants, maybe an offensive coordinator type, or he needs to be replaced. I know it's harsh, but it won't be the first time it won't be the first time in 2 years that a coach has been replaced after a conference finals appearance. That would just be my opinion. I think they definitely have enough, but we'll see going forward what they decide. I have a hard time believing that team, the way they operate, will go ahead and make a move on Scotty Brooks. They're just going to trust, like I said, that he's going to get better along with the players. And frankly, Durant and Westbrook are both 25 years old. They could just, get even better. Most people say you don't hit your prime until you're around 27, which is kind of scary for these guys. But right before we go, wanted to mention a couple things. First, a sad story. Former Nets owner Louis Katz died in a plane crash. He was killed along with 6 other people in a crash in Massachusetts on Saturday, according to his business partner. Katz was 72. That's one sad story. And on the other note, the Utah Jazz have reportedly went with second interviews for Adrian Griffin and Quinn Snyder. Bruce, any of those two names excite you at all if you're a Utah Jazz fan in terms of their next head coach?
Well, Adrian excites me because I played with him. Hard-nosed, tough guy. He was not blessed with the most athleticism, but he really maximized his effort as an NBA player. And then to being able to, learn under Coach Tom Thibodeau, I think Adrian will be very good as a head coach at some point. I like that. Quinn Snyder, I just think of Mizzou. I think how he played. I mean, he coached in Missouri, and then he coached in the D League, and he's a young players coach, Izzy. And you look at the influx in our game today, you really need guys who are able to communicate and really relate to the young players, or I should say, understanding how to relate to them in order to get the most out of them.
All right, well, we'll see if the Jazz go in either direction there going forward. But that's going to do it for this edition of the NBA Lockdown Podcast. For Bruce Bowen, I'm Israel Gutierrez. We will talk to you again on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening to the NBA Lockdown. For more great podcasts, visit the Pod Center page at ESPNradio.com.